at 42 million.
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
So, thank you very much.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
My God, there's a lot at stake with this one.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye. I don't believe it.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue.
It's like a challenge. Who am I?
But not every painting is quite what it seems.
Just the sort of thing you might associate with a faked painting.
It's a journey that can end in joy.
It is indeed by John Constable.
Oh, brilliant.
Wonderful.
Or bitter disappointment.
The work is not by Henry Moore. So sorry.
In this episode, we're investigating a whodunit with a difference.
Whoever designed it did so with a master's eye.
Can we find out who painted this dramatic image of Christ and help one woman in her quest to prove her late husband was right?
Ian certainly felt it was a very important work and that there was a story to be told about it.
I'm with him.
It's a journey that takes us from Scotland to Belgium and the beguiling world of Flemish art that was once the most prolific in Europe.
It's just magnificent, isn't it?
In one of our toughest investigations yet, we'll discover just how difficult it can be to identify the artists behind Flemish old masters.
This is highest quality, and we still don't know the name.
My goodness, this is all making me feel slightly worried.
Can we solve the mystery of who created this epic work of art?
Are you any closer to finding out who painted it?
No.
London, the National Gallery, one of the world's great treasure houses of art.
It would be quite something, wouldn't it, if we investigated a painting that ended up hanging on these hallowed walls.
Well, it's not impossible. I mean, there's even a Raphael hanging here that was found in an obscure back corridor.
Although justly famous for its Italian masterpieces, the gallery also holds an impressive collection of old masters from Northern Europe. Referred to as the Northern Renaissance, this stupendous altarpiece is one of its jewels.
It's very elaborate, isn't it? And there's so many figures crammed in there. So why have you brought me to look at this?
Because we have a rather interesting email from a viewer. Have a read.
You've invited viewers to submit paintings which might be a suitable subject for investigation. We would be grateful if you would consider the Lamentation to be such a subject. The painting is in the Church of John the Baptist, Port Glasgow. The work is recognised and accepted as an Antwerp Mannerist, but no certain identification of the painting was made.
The Antwerp Mannerists were a group of artists working in the southern Netherlands in the early 16th century. And Jan de Beer, the artist behind this picture, was amongst the most prominent.
So the painting referred to in this email, then, could be at least 500 years old.
And that is the problem when it comes to this school of art. A lot of the artists were anonymous. We just don't know their names. So as a result, we're still, in many senses, feeling our way. This, I think, is going to take us to the Low Countries, on which subject I don't think I've ever heard you speak Flemish.
I don't think you ever will.
How could a centuries-old work from the Low Countries have ended up in Scotland on the banks of the River Clyde? And crucially, who painted it? We've travelled to Port Glasgow to the Church of St. John the Baptist.
Does this bring back a few memories, Philip? The walk to church on a Sunday morning?
It does. I used to go to a church very like this every Sunday evening as an altar boy.
Been to confession lately?
Gosh, it's so rare in a Catholic church in Britain to find an old master of this impact, of this quality.
The way the arms of Christ just stretch across the painting, there's real drama, isn't there?
It was a viewer named Ian MacDonald who originally contacted us about the painting. Sadly, Ian died in 2021. But we've arranged to meet his widow, Marjorie, and the church caretaker, Jean Sweeney.
Hello.
Hi, Marjorie, Jean. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
We're just admiring this magnificent painting. This is obviously Christ just brought down from the cross. Philip, tell us a bit more about what we're looking at.
Well, it's a really powerful expression of grief. This is the lowest moment in the Passion of Christ. He's been crucified. His body is there on the ground. His mother swooning behind. This is the cathartic moment. The resurrection has yet to come.
And how long have you known this picture, Jean?
Well, I've known it from I was a child, about 10.
So you've been looking at it all those years?
Yeah.
And do you like it?
No.
No?
Absolutely not. When I was growing up, it was a scary thing to look at. A dead man just lying there.
Gosh. And where does it normally hang?
Normally hangs at the back of the church, just on the left-hand side.
That's a gloomy spot for it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
All the congregation looking forward and ignoring it. Do you have any idea when this painting came to the church?
No, I've got no idea how it got here, but the inscription on the frame says it was the Readors, 1854 till 1895.
A reredos is a piece of religious decoration in the form of a hanging, painting or sculpture positioned behind the altar. So the inscription tells us the work once hung above the most sacred part of the church. Its potential importance did not go unnoticed by Marjorie's husband, Ian.
What does it mean to you, Marjorie?
Well, part of what it means to me is what my late husband felt about it. He was an art history lecturer and he was asked to investigate it. He did quite a bit of work, but never managed to find out who painted it.
Did he get any sense of where it might have come from, what its provenance was?
He felt that it was a Flemish work, possibly 16th century.
Which makes absolute sense. I mean, Netherlandish painting of the 16th century was a very fertile time.
If this painting comes from the 1500s, then it has its roots in the Low Countries during the Flemish Golden Age, when cultural and economic activity flourished in Flanders, the Dutch-speaking region of modern-day Belgium. The port city of Antwerp was the commercial centre of Western Europe, where artists flocked to make a name for themselves. Ornate religious art was celebrated, and emperors, monarchs, and wealthy merchants paid huge sums to commission works to adorn Europe's great churches and cathedrals. Could this intriguing oil painting be a lost work by one of the great masters of Northern Europe? Or is it a much lesser work?
What about value, Philip? I mean, it's tricky at this very early stage, but can you put a value on this?
Well, I'm glad you said tricky at this really early stage, because it is. You know, we haven't got a name to it yet. However, we could be talking up to £100,000.
Gosh.
But
There's always a but.
without an artist's name, we may be talking little more than a tenth of that.
So, Jean, if it does turn out to be up to £100,000, what do you think the church will do with it?
I would like to think they would sell it. Nobody notices it. Nobody misses it.
And what about you, Marjorie?
Well, Ian certainly wasn't particularly interested in money, but he felt it was a very important work and that there was a story to be told about it.
I'm with him. The quality and the power of it is such that if we can place it in time, if we can give it an artist's name, some more of its mystery, its allure, I think, will work upon us.
Indeed.
Ian first began his quest to find out the truth about this painting 30 years ago. Since his death, Marjorie's been keen to carry on his work.
Marjorie, we're here because of Ian, of course, your late husband, and his quest to find out more about the painting.
Yes.
So tell me a bit about him.
Well, he was an art history lecturer, which is how I got to know him. He loved to share his knowledge.
How did the painting come to his attention then?
Well, his late brother-in-law, Bishop John Moan, was the Bishop of Paisley. He asked Ian if he would investigate it.
Did he keep any documentation, any correspondence relating to the research that he was doing?
Yes, there's quite a thick file of all the letters and photographs. He also tried to identify how it had come here.
Because, of course, that's the other big mystery, isn't it?
Yes.
After several painstaking years, Ian was unable to solve this whodunit. Reluctantly, he abandoned his research. It was only while watching Fake or Fortune that his hopes were reignited.
He was always so impressed with the way you did things, the way you x-rayed things, you analysed paint and things that he could never have done. And so he thought, well, there's an opportunity possibly to identify the artist.
And here we are.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that Ian is not here to take part in this journey that we're about to embark on, this painting that he cared so much about.
Yes, he would have relished the opportunity to debate about it and find out how it had come here.
Well, you're carrying on his quest for him.
Yes, that's true, but in a way I feel a bit of an imposter because he was the one that did all the work and in fact I'm the fake.
What, a Fake or Fortune? Definitely not. You're carrying it on in his memory and hopefully we'll find the answers he wanted.
Well, thank you, and I hope you do find the answers.
We have a huge challenge ahead of us, but we're determined to continue Ian's quest. To kick off our investigation, I've sent the picture to the Kelvin Centre for Conservation and Cultural Heritage Research at the University of Glasgow. Before we make a start on the scientific analysis, I want to take a closer look.
This is very much the sort of painting you would have encountered as you crossed Europe in the 16th century in a Catholic church. And I think it's terribly important to get a sense of how one might have seen it in the darkness of a church interior. The only light being stained glass just filtering through the windows or possibly flickering candles. This is an image designed to move you. What is clear is that this picture has been beautifully designed. You start in the left-hand corner with the figure of John looking in, and then your eye bobs along the top, and then you slip right down to the bottom left, and then up the eye goes again. It whirls around. Whoever designed it did so with a master's eye. But as you get closer and begin to start picking it apart, I'm beginning to feel different messages, different sort of stylistic accents. Look at Mary Magdalene. I mean, one of the first things I note is her dress, which incidentally is beautifully painted, more delicately, as it happens, than a lot of the other areas in the picture. And to my mind, is much more suggestive of Italian painting, of the South. And in contrast, look at the figure of John in the far left-hand corner. The painting is much more opaque, more solid. It feels almost as if this artist is looking in one direction and then another. Whoever painted this picture was familiar with early Netherlandish painting of the 1500s. But it also feels to me like an artist who's seen the great masters of Italy, the likes of Raphael and others, and has fused them together.
While Philip gets to know the Port Glasgow picture, I'm following up on the leads left by Marjorie's late husband, Ian.
So this is Ian's file with all sorts of correspondence in it. Not much in the way of provenance leads, but there is one note that he's written here. Early parish priest in Port Glasgow was a Fleming, by which he means was from Flanders in Belgium. So that's something to look into. Rather helpfully, Ian's drawn up a list of 7 potential names for the painting, most of which I've never heard of, let alone know how to pronounce. We've got Ambrosius Franken, Hieronymus Franken, Franz Franken, I assume they're all related, Martin de Vos, Frans Floris, someone called the Flemish Raphael, and then Jan Masseis.
7 names. Could one of them have painted the Port Glasgow picture? At the gallery in London, we're taking a closer look at the contenders.
So, here's our painting in Port Glasgow, and Ian has left us a list of 7 potential suspects in this ecclesiastical whodunit. So let's start with the first one. The man known as the Flemish Raphael turns out to be this artist, Michiel Coxey, apparently very famous in his time.
Coxey is a real name to conjure with. He was the first Flemish artist to go to Italy and establish a career there. He immersed himself in the works of Michelangelo and Raphael, and he brought this style back to the Netherlands, hence his name, the Flemish Raphael.
Next up, Jan Massees.
I usually associate Masses with non-religious subject matter, but let's just keep him in the mix.
Okay. Then we have this man, Frans Floris.
Another big name, and another one of those artists who went to Italy. When he returned to Antwerp, he became a huge success.
And I've looked into him as well, and he trained many of the next generation of Flemish painters, including the next candidate on our list, Martin de Vos. He was a protege of Frans Floris. Then we have the Franken brothers. They sound a bit like a band, don't they? Frans, Hieronymus, and Ambrosius. No portrait for him, I'm afraid.
I mean, they were a massive dynasty, a sort of family firm, which wasn't rare at that date. Definitely ones to keep in the mix.
OK, so we've got our lineup of 7 suspects, and all we need to do now is try and work out which one of these it could be.
But we've got to be careful here, because we're dealing with artists who ran workshops, picture-making factories in which many assistants and pupils could be working on the same painting. We've got to make sure that we're dealing with the work of a master rather than one of his minions.
In order to understand whether the painting was the work of many hands or one, I'm travelling to the Belgian city of Antwerp. In the 1500s, it was a thriving commercial centre for the production of art. The city had many workshops where painters came together under the direction of a master. The most famous master of them all was Peter Paul Rubens. Today, his workshop has been carefully preserved.
Hi, Natasha.
Hello.
I've arranged to meet Natasha Peters, an expert on painters and their workshops in Antwerp.
So is this where Rubens lived?
Yes, so actually the house was divided into his living quarters and his workshop, and so he could pop from one to the other very easily.
This place was once a creative powerhouse of Flemish art.
So this is a gallery now, Natasha, but originally this was Rubens' workshop, or one of them.
Yes, well, actually it's the only workshop left in Antwerp, and originally there would have been hundreds of workshops, so this is quite special, quite exceptional. And had you come in here in the 17th century, you would have found it filled with life, with apprentices, with journeymen, and everybody was working on paintings in various stages of completion, and apprentices were drawing, making copies, etc., so filled with life.
The artist's workshop was a slick operation. At the helm, the master painter. Not just a highly skilled artist, but a businessman who ran his studio like a picture production line. Assistants were employed to prepare panels and grind pigments with oil to keep a steady stream of paint flowing. Young apprentices would learn their craft by sketching plaster casts and copying works. They would be trained in the master's style. To increase production, the master employed journeymen, freelance painters who were paid by the day and travelled from workshop to workshop.
Journeymen are very valuable assets to any workshop, and that's also the secret of Antwerp's success. It's people working together, one day for one painter, the next day for another painter. So that's really why they could arrive at this huge production and why Antwerp's paintings were shipped all over the world.
There's one unfinished work of art on display that provides a rare glimpse into the way a master and his workshop collaborated. Could the Port Glasgow picture have been made in the same way?
Looking at this painting then, for example, how much of this would have been journeyman and how much Rubens?
Well, Rubens thought up the composition, worked it out in a very sketchy stage with the contours, but because, of course, it's not finished, we can see that the background is already filled in by another hand. And It might well have been that Rubens would not finish this painting himself, but would leave the work to his assistant.
Wow. So how much of his paintings did Rubens actually do then?
Well, Rubens was a very involved master. He was an artist, but he was also a businessman. He was in England for months, in Spain, so he went all over Europe. And the workshop turned out paintings just as if the master was there.
So I must ask, so if we look at Rubens today, it's quite possible that he did the odd brushstroke and that was it?
Or he designed it and then went off on a mission. And so the workshop turned out paintings as usual.
What, in his absence?
Yes, in his absence. We are still not entirely sure how many paintings he actually made in his lifetime. And so that notion of that lone single master signing off his works does not apply here.
So when it comes to the picture that we're investigating then, and obviously what we do on Fake or Forged is we try and attribute it to one artist. Do you think we'll be able to do that?
No.
No.
No, I don't think so. No.
Natasha's scepticism shows just how hard we'll have to work to have any chance of identifying the artist who came up with the Port Glasgow picture.
Back in Glasgow at the Kelvin Centre, a team of experts have been carrying out a series of forensic tests on the painting.
It's interesting that this head is actually a lot paler, a lot more see-through.
Imaging techniques allow us to see beneath the surface layers of the paint, right down to the original underdrawing. Any evidence of changes, known in the business as pentimenti, could indicate the hand of a master.
What we're able to now make out are some significant alterations, some changes of direction midway. Look here, the knees of Christ. They're unquestionably different from the original lines. They've been altered. But if we look in the top left, there's something even more dramatic, and that's the head of John. Originally, John was in profile. You can see by that strong dark line that goes down his forehead. His eyes were tilted upwards. But now that's altered. The artist has angled John's head slightly towards us. And instead of the eyes glancing upwards, he's gazing into a sort of foreground, middle distance. I mean, why has the artist done this? Well, it's quite likely that in the process of putting the painting together, they felt it's not quite working. We need a bit more emotional connection. Who knows? But what it does show us is that the artist is thinking as they're going along. There's some sort of creative process. This isn't what you would expect from some copyist or from some student or apprentice. I think we're dealing with someone who really knows what they're doing.
It looks like there's a serious artist behind the Port Glasgow picture. But who could it be? I'm heading to Edinburgh in search of some expert help. I need to follow up on the list of potential candidates that Ian identified, so I've come to the National Galleries of Scotland. I'm meeting Senior Curator of Northern European Art, Dr. Tico Zyford.
Tika, hello. Listen, thank you very much for helping us out with this.
Pleasure.
Can he help narrow down our search from the lineup of 7 suspects?
I've got a list of names, which I just want to run past you and see if any of these strike you as possible artists.
I would probably rule out the Franken brothers straight away. We're talking about a seriously big picture. The Frankens mostly are smaller. They tend to have more crowded, multi-figure compositions.
Right.
Martin de Vos doesn't sound likely either. I think some of what I said about the Frankens applies to him as well. He wouldn't be one of my prime candidates. I think Franz Flores and Jan Masseis, this is closer to this, definitely, also in terms of the Italianate aspect of the picture.
And then what about the Flemish Raphael, Michiel Coxey?
He was actually the first Fleming who worked in Italy for a considerable time. So in terms of absorbing the Italianate element, he's the artist of all those names, which I would put top on my list.
One of the things that strikes me going through Ian's research is just how difficult it's been to try and put any name to this painting. Why is it so difficult?
Not very many of the works are signed. This is, of course, very much different from what artists did later on, where you always find the signature somewhere. Have a look at this here, for example, Fiona. This is a super painting. We have no clue who the painter is. If you look at how he painted leaves and things, it looks like embroidery. So he was labeled the master of the embroidered foliage.
So no one knows the name of this artist. So the art world has come up with this fictitious name just to be able to describe him in some way.
This is highest quality, and we still don't know the name.
My goodness, this is all making me feel slightly worried about what we're going to do about our picture. And then what about how the painting could have got from Flanders to Scotland? Looking at Ian's notes, he talks about the painting being in Port Glasgow from 1854. And then he mentions early parish priest in Port Glasgow was a Fleming. I mean, that is all we've got. So any ideas as to when it's likely to have come to Scotland?
Well, early could be very early. There are close relations between Scotland and Flanders from the 15th century onwards. But it could also be close to when the church opened and they wanted to give something to the church.
Wow. So that's a huge period of time that we have to investigate.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
With almost 500 years of provenance to consider and no obvious signature, the scale of the challenge facing us is daunting. Back in London at the gallery, we're taking a closer look at the artists who are still in contention.
So here is Ian's list of 7 potential suspects, and Tycho has ruled out 4 of them. So that leaves us with 3. Michiel Coxey, Jan Massees and Frans Floris.
I've got my doubts about Jan Massees.
Why?
Well, have a look at this. It's called A Merry Company, Carousing Peasants. This is typical of the type of painting that he was doing. In fact, he's been credited with being a pioneer of secular painting in the Low Countries.
Certainly, when you look at our painting, it's nothing like it. They're having a very jolly time. And of course, this is a heavily religious subject, isn't it?
I think Massees is definitely off the list.
OK. So then we're left with Michiel Coxey and Frans Floris. So I've done some digging into Coxey. Now, it turns out he moved in very elevated circles. He was a favourite of the Holy Roman Emperor. He was court painter to Philip II of Spain, who singled him out to paint frescoes in the Vatican in Rome. And then there's Frans Floris. Now, he was a big player as well. He was hugely successful, led this very extravagant lifestyle. He had a big influence on the Northern Renaissance, and he had a large workshop in Antwerp as well.
So we have 2 really very significant names to consider now at work in Antwerp in the 16th century.
Back at the Kelvin Centre, I'm keen to see if another scientific technique can help us date the wooden panel that the Port Glasgow picture is painted on. Dendrochronology is the process of dating wood by measuring the tree rings. Counting the rings will tell us how old the tree is, but measuring the distance between them creates a pattern in time, which can be used to identify not only when the tree was growing, but crucially, the likely date it was cut down. Looking at a cross-section of the Port Glasgow picture through a microscope reveals the bubble-like structures that make up the rings. Measuring these could reveal the earliest possible date the panel was made. Ian Tyers is one of the world's leading authorities on dendrochronology. Can he put a date to our picture?
How confident can we be at dating a painting by looking at the available tree rings?
These boards have got 150 or 200 rings in them. Most likely we can date this to within a decade or 2. In effect, each of these boards has a fingerprint in it that's a fingerprint in time and place.
That's a rather remarkable thought. What about these batons on the back, this bracing?
These are, unfortunately, a later addition to the panel. There's no original back left on the panel itself, and it's been planed down, and this cradle has been put on the back in order to strengthen it at some point.
Ouch. So all of that information that could have helped us, stamps, labels, what have you, they've just disappeared into the into the ether.
They've disappeared into the bin in the woodyard, yes.
Thankfully, dendrochronology can salvage some of the clues lost in restoration and tell us more than just the date of the panel.
There's many layers of information to come out of this. Does it date? Does it tell us where? And does it tell us which trees?
All material that we would find extremely useful and valuable.
Well, let's hope that it does produce some answers then.
While we wait and see if the Port Glasgow picture can be dated, I've come to the archives of the Archdiocese of Glasgow to follow up on the lead Ian left, that an early parish priest was a Fleming, a native of Flanders. Can the archives provide any evidence to show he was right?
I've got here the Scottish Catholic Directory, which is a list of all the parishes and their clergy. And on page 91, here is our church, Port Glasgow St. John's. And it mentions the first priest, a Reverend John Carolan. Now, he's actually from Ireland. He's not Flemish. So the connection to Flanders that Ian, Marjorie's husband's been talking about, it's not him. And then I've looked through all the priests that have been at St. John the Baptist, and none of them are from Flanders. So I can't find anything to substantiate Ian's theory there. I'm wondering if it's a red herring.
There's another lead in the form of the inscription on the frame. It says that the painting was the reredos in the church from 1854 until 1895, meaning it hung behind the altar. Could it have been a gift to mark the founding of the church?
In the directory, it details the opening of the church in 1854 on the 22nd of October. Of course, 1854 is the date on our painting. It says the church was so densely crowded that numbers were obliged to retire for want of room. It also mentions a rather intriguing name, a Mrs. Colonel Hutchison. And it says, the Catholics resident here have much reason to be grateful to this excellent lady for the great interest she has taken in their new church. And it turns out that her first name was Isabella. And in the Catholic archive, there is this rather sweet little portrait of her. So digging a bit deeper, I can see that she was born in 1780 in Port Glasgow, and she was the daughter of a merchant and the widow of a man called George Hutchison. Now, the place I found more information about George Hutchison is here, the Centre for the Study of the Legacies of British Slavery. So George Hutchison was a late lieutenant colonel in the service of the Honourable East India Company, which was a huge trading company that made much of its money off the back of slavery. So Isabella got some of her money from him, and she used that money for, it says here, erecting, completing and furnishing the residence for the Sisters of Mercy at Lauriston Gardens. That's a convent in Edinburgh. So the money came from a very dark place, and she used some of it for the Catholic Church, and this convent in particular. So I think that's something worth looking into.
I've asked Marjorie to join me at the Sisters of Mercy convent in Edinburgh to find out more about Isabella Hutchison. Did she donate the Port Glasgow picture to the church?
One of the many questions about your painting, Marjorie, is how did it come to be in Glasgow, in Port Glasgow, to be specific?
Yes, indeed, indeed.
So it might have something to do with this woman.
Ah.
This is Isabella Hutchison. We know that she was very wealthy. We know that she was a benefactor to the Catholic Church.
Right.
She also came from Port Glasgow and was at the church, St. John the Baptist, when it opened in 1854.
Oh, my goodness.
And there's more, because the Catholic Directory states that she paid for the furnishings in the church as well as the altar.
Right.
An entry in the Catholic Directory says the altar, tabernacle, chalice and ciborium, and all the altar linens and furnishings, together with vestments, all of which are very elegant and costly, were presented by her.
But if she paid for the altar, did she also pay for the altarpiece?
Could be. Could be.
It's not proof, but it's quite convincing.
Yes, yes, it is.
And having spoken with the sisters here at the convent, I mean, they think, given her relations with the Catholic Church and how much she gave to the Catholic Church, that it is quite likely that she did the painting to the church as well.
Are you any closer to finding out who painted it?
No, But we are working on it, so I hope to find out very soon. But at this precise moment, I cannot give you a name, I'm afraid.
Okay. That's a difficult one.
It certainly is.
Our provenance trail hasn't got us any further in establishing who painted the Port Glasgow picture. But now we know Isabella Hutchison most likely donated it to the church.
Back at the Kelvin Centre, it's the moment we've been waiting for. Ian Tyers has sequenced the tree rings, and we have a result. It's a huge piece of information Marjorie's late husband Ian longed to know. I've asked Marjorie to join me. We're about to find out whether we can date the Port Glasgow picture.
So, Marjorie, I know one of the things that Ian was interested in and wanted to do was apply technology to coming up with answers for this picture.
Yes, indeed. If he didn't have that facility, obviously, in the early 90s, and he wasn't involved with any lab or anything like that.
To be fair, in the 90s, the technology we're talking about wasn't as sophisticated as it is now, and dendrochronology has come on leaps and bounds. So, Ian, what have you found?
The last ring in the panel is 1574.
Oh, goodness.
How specific can you be on that?
So that means these trees are still growing in 1574, and therefore the panel must be after 1574.
That is truly amazing.
So now we know the date the tree was most likely felled and the earliest possible year the panel could have been made.
And mostly panels are used, what, within 10 years?
Yes, the general understanding we have is that they are used fresh and very quickly.
Do you think Ian would have found that useful?
Oh, definitely. To get such precision would have absolutely amazed him. He'd be delighted, absolutely delighted.
This is the most revealing clue in our investigation yet. The date of the panel means that the Port Glasgow picture could not have been painted before 1574, ruling out Franz Floris, who died in 1570. There's only one potential master left in our ecclesiastical whodunit, and what a name he was, Michiel Coxey, known as the Flemish Raphael. To get to know the artist better, we're on our way to Coxey's homeland of Belgium, to see one of Europe's most famous artworks in St. Bavo's Cathedral in Ghent.
Wow.
Spectacular, isn't it?
It really is awe-inspiring.
We've come to see a masterpiece Michiel Coxey knew well.
This mystical painting has emerged after 10 years of restoration.
Just magnificent, isn't it?
The Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, also known as the Ghent altarpiece, was created by brothers Hubert and Jan van Eyck 600 years ago. During its long life, it has been much copied and coveted as an object of desire.
And it's had quite a life. It's been stolen more than once, hasn't it?
Stolen by Napoleon, by the Nazis, it nearly burnt. It was recovered by the Americans after the war when it was found in a salt mine. I mean, this is a painting with form. But what I want you to have a look at is this.
Right.
What do you make of it?
Well, I presume this is that, isn't it?
Not quite. This painting was so admired and desired that people wanted their own Ghent altarpiece. So 100 years after it was painted, Philip II of Spain commissioned this copy. And the artist was Coxey.
Oh, right.
The artist who we have in our sights as the painter of our work.
The commission to copy this masterpiece for the king was one of Coxey's most prestigious, but he was far more than a mere copyist. Famous in his own lifetime, Coxey was hailed as one of the great artists of the Low Countries, and his influence on religious art was profound. His altarpieces were greatly admired, and in Brussels, the Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage have given us a rare opportunity to compare one by Coxey with the Port Glasgow picture. Conservators here restored the Ghent altarpiece, and Helen Dubois and Nathalie Lacaire have offered to tell me more about this authentic work. can we find any similarities between this and the Port Glasgow picture that might prove they are by the same artist?
Hello, Helen. Hello, Natalie.
Hello. Hello.
Thank you so much for giving us the time to show us this magnificent picture. So, what can you tell us about its history?
Well, this painting is a triptych painted by Michiel Coxey. It was painted for the Church of the Sablon, which is in the center of Brussels.
I mean, can you, at first glance, see any similarities?
The colors are quite striking, and there's some similarities. You have this kind of ochre tone, purplish tones, which we call also these colors we call changeants, which are different tones combined with each other.
Can you see any other comparisons?
Well, you can see in both cases that the faces, the postures go back to more Italian examples. You can see these painters are both inspired by Raphael. Also, there's clearly a reference to Roman or Greek ancient sculptures.
It's like the static coming to life in a funny sort of way.
Yes, very much. It's very dynamic composition, full of emotion. You see movements, people falling backwards. There's a lot of action in here. Your picture is full of emotion, very intense as well.
Yes.
In this period, you can see that Flemish artists have not quite understood really the Italian of the Renaissance sense of composition. The action is there, but it's fixed in time. It's just not really quite flowing as it does in Italian paintings.
Stylistic similarities between the two are promising. But we have seen evidence that the artist who created the Port Glasgow picture changed things as they went along. Is there anything similar in the Coxey painting?
So, Natalie, have you found any similar changes of mind in the painting you've now got to know so well?
Yeah, there are a lot of changes. Look at his foot here, for example. He changed his mind and replaced the composition.
Almost as if he's trying to sort of rebalance the figure.
That's a proof of the creation process of the painter.
Well, I mean, something very similar has happened in our picture of John. I mean, it's not a foot, it's a face. So both these painters, Coxey and the one who did ours, are searching. They're never quite satisfied.
The similarities between this known work by Michiel Coxey and the Port Glasgow picture are compelling. But these works have something else in common. Both were painted in the aftermath of one of the most devastating periods in Western art history. From the 1520s, the Reformation swept through Europe. In this religious revolution, Protestants rebelled against what they believed was a corrupt Catholic Church. The result was a series of violent attacks on places of worship. Countless religious paintings and statues were destroyed in what's known as the Great Iconoclasm. But in the decades that followed, there was a Catholic revival, and with it a huge demand to redecorate empty churches with new religious art to replace what had been lost. Artists like Michiel Coxey were back in business. Oliver Kick is an expert in this fascinating period of art history. Can he find any clues that could support the theory that Coxey painted the Port Glasgow picture?
This is coming straight after a period of religious turmoil with the iconoclasm. There was huge destruction of altarpieces and works of art in churches.
Leaving lots of empty spaces.
But leaving also lots of opportunities for the Catholic painters who came afterwards. So they had lots of commissions coming in to replace all these destroyed altarpieces.
I mean, presumably, it was a great time to be a painter.
Yes, these painters were working at breakneck speed to produce huge quantities of art, to refurnish those churches.
Where would these ideas for the composition have come from then, do you think?
What they would often refer to is, first of all, antique sculpture or classical sculpture, and then they would also use sources such as workshop drawings and then prints. They took certain sources and recombined them. One print, for example, would be a print after Tintoretto, where we see that he uses exactly the same foreshortening of the head of Christ.
There might have been a sort of scrapbook of images from the past, lots of ideas, and then a group of people under the work of a master putting paintings like this together.
Exactly.
It was also an opportunity for artists to look back at previous generations, and Oliver can see similarities between the Port Glasgow picture and this much earlier altarpiece by a master called Bernard van Orley.
One striking comparison is also to be made with a lamentation painted by the painter Bernard van Orley, who was working mostly in the 1520s, 1530s.
Okay, so you're painting a really interesting picture here in response to need, after all of the destruction, workshops, plundering the past with images and other inspirations, putting together art.
This is really tantalising. To me, it's clear that whoever painted the Port Glasgow picture was inspired by this painting by Bernard van Orley.
Back in London, we're getting together with Marjorie to share our latest discoveries.
Well, Marjorie, you've been very patient with us while we've been looking through Ian's list of suspects. And of course, this is what we're talking about, the Port Glasgow painting. Take a look at this. Now, this is a triptych by an artist called Bernard van Orley. It's in a church in Bruges. A triptych, of course, is a painting in 3 parts forming an altarpiece or a reredos, like the Port Glasgow picture.
Yes, of course.
Marjorie, I want you to cast your eyes to the bottom right.
Ah, yes, a lamentation.
A lamentation of Christ. But look even closer in comparison to the Port Glasgow picture.
Oh, my goodness, yes. Very similar pose, slightly different composition.
Well, the more time you spend analysing it, the more, I think, you come up with similarities. And if you look at the way that the figure of Christ is sitting, lying,
Yes.
it's almost a mirror image. And also notice the attitude of the head and the foreshortening.
So the question is, did Bernard van Orley, who painted this, paint the Port Glasgow picture?
Yes.
No, because Bernard van Orley died in 1541. And we know that this was painted after 1574.
Ah, yes, thanks to the dendrochronology.
Exactly. But this is where it gets exciting, because Bernard van Orley, and here he is, was a master artist with his own workshop full of apprentices and pupils. And one of them was Michiel Coxey.
My goodness, he looks like quite a guy. So he would have seen the work by Bernard van Orley.
Well, of course, because, I mean, at the risk of stating the obvious, this is before the days of internet and catalogue raisonné. And for Michiel to be familiar with this painting, he would almost certainly have had to come into some sort of physical presence with it. And it strikes me that the coincidence is too great to ignore.
It's not hard and fast evidence, but it's certainly compelling. And we'll just have to see if the experts agree.
Yes, let's hope that they do.
Thanks to this early 16th century work by his former master, we've narrowed our search down to one suspect, the Flemish Raphael, Michiel Coxey. But have we done enough to convince the experts? Back in Antwerp, I've come to a renowned centre for art historical research, the Rubenianum, where I've arranged to meet the leading expert on Coxey, Professor Koenraad Jonkeren. Hi there.
Hi, nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
His opinion will be decisive. Koen has agreed to share his initial thoughts before he considers our evidence. Does he buy our theory that the Port Glasgow painter was inspired by Bernard van Orley?
One thing that struck me is the similarity of this Christ figure to the very unusual figure in the Bernard van Orley painting, 50 or so years earlier. Is it possible that whoever came up with the idea for this picture was connected to or familiar with Van Orley in some way?
Yeah, I think so. I think certainly you see ideas from Bernard van Orley literally sampled in this panel. The whole composition is being traced. You see some minor changes in some figures like the St. John, but hardly.
And the fact that Christ has his knees up in this position, was that unusual?
Well, it's something that you don't see that often in 16th century painting. It was introduced by Van Orley. And so there's this direct line between the painter who painted your panel and this early 16th century important master. It is a piece of what must have been an enormous altarpiece. It was cut down.
Oh, right, I see. You think this is just a part of the original work?
I think so, because the figures are not fully on it, which is very exceptional. So it must have been cut down. And it was made at the end of the 16th century, on the eve of Baroque. That's the period when they start to experiment and sample everything that had been tried out in the 16th century, and that people like Rubens were eventually able to build their career on. And so this is, I think, a quite exceptional example of such a late 16th century panel.
While Koen retires to consider our evidence, back in London, we're taking stock.
I think we've built as strong a case as we can for this painting, particularly given the complexity of this period of art history. Imaging technology has shown us pentimenti, some significant alterations, the sign that a masterful, creative hand is at work. Dendrochronology, tree ring analysis, has established that the Port Glasgow picture could not have been painted before 1574. And this brings into focus an artist, Michiel Coxey, whose stylistic traits we've seen in Belgium. Also, the painting seems inspired by Coxey's master, Bernard van Orley.
This investigation has certainly had its challenges. The way the artist workshop operated in the 16th century with its many assistants, apprentices, journeymen, it was doubtful, certainly at the beginning, whether we'd ever be able to name a potential master. The provenance was initially promising. We managed to establish that a wealthy benefactor, Isabella Hutchison, paid for the church's altar and its furnishings, which we assume included the painting. That's where the trail went cold. With the help of many experts, both here and in Belgium, we've managed to work our way through Ian's list of suspects. And all the evidence seems to point to one name, Michiel Coxey, court painter to Philip II of Spain. After several weeks, we have a decision. Koen has consulted with his colleagues, and Dr. Tycho Seifert from the National Galleries of Scotland is joining us to deliver their verdict. Have we done enough to prove that the Port Glasgow picture is a lost masterpiece by Michiel Coxey? Marjorie is joining us at the gallery to hear the verdict.
Hi, Marjorie.
Hello.
Good to see you, Marjorie.
Good to be here.
So this is the day. Are you looking forward to it?
Oh, it's so exciting. Dying to know about it.
In terms of valuation, if we can give it the name that we've been trying to, Michiel Coxey, then we could be talking in terms of about £100,000.
Oh, gosh.
It's an impressive picture.
Yes, Ian would certainly agree with you on that.
What do you think Ian would say if he was here now?
He would be delighted that so much interest had been expressed in it. It's lovely to be doing this in memory of him.
Well, we've given it our best shot.
Tycho has joined us, and we're about to find out if we can put the name Michiel Coxey to the Port Glasgow picture.
So you've reached a decision.
Yes.
Are you ready to hear it, Marjorie?
Yes, as ready as I'll ever be.
I've discussed the research with Koen in Belgium, and Koen's opinion is, and I agree with him, that this painting is not by Michiel Coxey.
Oh, that's a shame.
I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
What makes you think it's not by Michiel Coxey?
Well, Koen's feeling was that the way it is painted is not as refined as we would expect him in his prime. And I think the style it is painted feels a tad later and not Michiel Coxey. However, there is also good news. Koen feels very strongly that the painter of this picture here must have had intimate knowledge of Michiel Coxey's workshop and the way he worked, And it must be a painter that towards the end of Michiel's life was in the circle of the artist. And the prime candidate would be his son, Raphael.
Was he a significant artist in his own right, or just another person in the workshop?
He was the oldest son of Michiel Coxey, and he worked with him. He collaborated with him, so they sometimes even worked on the same picture. We know that. Raphael would have had this intimate knowledge, which we feel was necessary to paint this.
I feel really positive about what you just said. I mean, we had that whole thicket of possibilities, did we not? And we've managed to narrow it down to a likely name and place and date.
I think you've done a brilliant job, frankly. At this point in art history, with the structure of workshops and everything, to find an artist who was responsible from start to finish, this is the exception rather than the rule. So to narrow it down in the way we've been able to, I think is actually a success.
So where do you think this leaves us then, Philip, in terms of how we put a value on this picture?
It's such an opaque period of art history that even just to give it as closely as you have to these key figures, I think still makes it a very desirable painting. I can see museums being interested, I can see collectors being interested. In terms of valuation, not probably £100,000, probably £60,000, £70,000.
Oh my goodness. I'm sure the bishop will be interested to hear that.
I'm sure he will. Ian MacDonald started investigating the Port Glasgow picture 30 years ago. Thanks to the clues he left us, we can now say it was painted by someone in Michiel Coxey's circle. Most likely Coxey's son, Raphael, named after the Italian painter Coxey admired so much.
Ian would be very impressed with all the research that's been done. It certainly proved that it was late 16th century Flemish, which is what he thought, that it was an important work, which has also been agreed. Yeah, he would be very satisfied with that. But he would have relished the discussion. And that's, I think, what is missing. On the whole, that would have been his great joy.
Now we've finished the work Ian began, the painting will return home to St. John the Baptist Church in Port Glasgow, where it will go back on the wall for parishioners to enjoy.